Welcome to Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on the podcast. Her name is Melinda, and she's with an organization called Voters, Not Politicians. So she's going to talk to us about the exciting and important work that her organization does. So welcome to the podcast, Melinda.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have you. If we could get started by you kindly giving an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Yeah, so my name is Melinda Billingsley. I am the Communications Director for Voters Not Politicians, which is the premier nonpartisan volunteer activism group in Michigan. So I started with Voters Not Politicians back in 2022 during our second ballot initiative campaign, which was working to expand voting access. Overall, Voters Not Politicians has really done a lot to transform the structure of Michigan's democracy. First, by championing the 2018 redistricting reform that created the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission in Michigan, and then by, again, using the ballot initiative process to expand ballot access and voting rights here in Michigan in 2022 with that initiative was called Promote the Vote 2022. And then now we are once again working to transform our politics by getting money out of state politics in Michigan and targeting some of the biggest corporate contributors to our state politics.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. It sounds like we're going to have a lot to talk about in this podcast.
Yeah, there's a little bit we could get into, you know.
One thing that stood out amongst some things was that you have an independent redistricting commission in your state. Now, from this podcast, we get a lot of people who, that's one of their biggest problems is with gerrymandering, and they inevitably are drawn to partisan lines, whether one party or the other. So we'd love to hear about how such a thing came to happen in your state of Michigan.
Absolutely, yeah. So this was really the founding of Voters Not Politicians, and basically in the aftermath of the 2016 election, a lot of folks were sort of feeling like, well, what just happened is not what we expected to happen, and we have a lot of big emotions about that, and we want to really take action. And there was a small group of folks in Michigan, most of whom didn't really have strong political experience, but they really focused in on gerrymandering as one thing that, like just one thing that they could do that would make democracy better for everyone. And that's really been the North Star for Voters Not Politicians. Like, we want democracy to work better for everyone in Michigan because all political power is inherent to the people. You know, that's in Michigan's state constitution. It's in a lot of state constitutions. And the way that they did that is, Michigan has what's called the citizen-initiated statutes, also citizen-initiated constitutional amendments. And basically, you go out with petitions. These are very particular legal documents. You draw up the language that you want to make into law or into the Constitution. You go out, you convince people to sign this petition if they agree with your cause. And if you get enough signatures, it goes on the ballot before voters. In 2017, Voters Not Politicians wasn't, you know, an organization with a staff or anything. It was just a lot of volunteers. It was thousands of volunteers across the state of Michigan who created a whole campaign structure from scratch. And went out, you know, hit the ground, knocked on doors, had events, they did drive-throughs, all sorts of things, got really creative with it. And they ended up getting 425,000 signatures, all volunteers, in less than 6 months. And it got on the ballot. And then, of course, when you talk to people and you say, like, hey, do you want to end gerrymandering? Everyone's like, yeah, of course. In Michigan, you know, the Republican Party had really controlled gerrymandering for years, but there were other, like, you know, across the state, it's a really purple state, there are Republicans in districts that had been heavily gerrymandered to favor Democrats sort of like as a necessary loss, for Republicans. And it meant that, those voters weren't really being heard. And even Republican voters in safe Republican districts would say, well, because this person isn't worried about being unelected because they're in a safe district, they're not listening to me. And that really was the problem that ending gerrymandering solved, is that voters weren't listening to their politicians were not listening to their voters because they didn't have to, because of the way the system works. So we changed the system so that politicians would have to be more accountable, because everyone isn't in a safe seat anymore. You really have to fight for all of your votes.
Oh, great, awesome. So how percentage of the population in Michigan has to support one of those ballots for it to pass?
So in Michigan, it is, a simple majority, to pass the ballot initiative. The signature threshold, is determined based on voter turnout in the last gubernatorial election. So, it has sort of changed over the years, as we've increased our voter turnout, which is excellent because we want more people to participate in our democracy. It has also made it harder and harder each consecutive cycle to get those signatures. But so far we have been successful every time.
Oh, great. When I was in school, I studied sociology and I studied social movements, and one interesting thing that happens is when so successful, they run into an interesting dilemma, because then, particularly in regards to a cause-based one like we're talking about today. So what we learned is when an organization becomes successful, then they wonder what they do next. So since you became successful, you succeeded at your mission, your goal of getting that redistricting commission, what are you doing now as your main activity? Are you monitoring that redistricting commission to see that it complies with what you like, or are you on to other things?
Yeah, so that's like a really good point. And actually, because Michigan has had before, these citizen ballot campaigns, previously, as a general rule, whether those campaigns were successful or not, once they were done, they dissolved. The organizations that led them didn't exist anymore. But Voters Not Politicians was kind of unique in that we had all these volunteers who were now well-trained political activists, grassroots activists. And, as an organization, we decided we don't want to just stop. We like being active, we like being involved, we like taking action. So we kept going. So after the initiative originally passed, which was in fall of 2018, that November, we launched a sort of implementation, looking at how the commission actually was started. So we followed that entire process, from setting up the commission and getting the commissioners onboarded to getting draft maps and having public comment and public meetings, helping members of the public and specific communities draw their own versions of what they think maps that would represent the state could look like, all the way through to the end, at the end of 2020, am I right? Is it 2020? Maybe 2021. It might have been the end of 2021. But when the commission finally decided and voted on the maps, and then even when, they came back a few years later, I want to say it was in the beginning of 2024, and had to, make some new changes, and correct some maps, we were still there throughout that entire process, making sure that voters were aware and informed. So we very much have stuck with this gerrymandering or this redistricting part of it, because that matters and that will continue to matter as long as we continue to have redistricting, making sure that voters are informed and are part of the process, because the whole point is that it's a citizen process now, so we never want to lose sight of the voters being involved in that process.
Great.
So that's the one piece of it. And then on the other side, we also did other things, because that was, that's a lot when it's happening, but then there's also a lot of downtime with redistricting. And again, no one wanted to lose the momentum we had. So we really, sort of not changed, but evolved to be a full pro-democracy organization. So we have our C3 side that focuses on voter education and civic education and voter outreach. We also do grassroots lobbying, and we train volunteers to go and talk to their legislator and talk about the policies that really matter when it comes to democracy. Things like FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, things like transparency and ethics, things like campaign finance reform. And then, of course, in 2022, we partnered with a big coalition of voting rights organizations to do another ballot initiative. So all this to say is there's no shortage of problems to tackle when it comes to correcting and improving and strengthening democracy in Michigan and in the United States at large. So we have just, whenever we, conquered the one challenge, we look ahead and say, all right, what's next? And we, take a swing at that fight next.
All right. So are you happy with the way the Redistricting Commission operates? Are they doing what they are said to do in that new law that you supported through that ballot initiative? Are you happy with them?
Yeah, one of the most important things that we want to make sure that folks know about Michigan's Redistricting Commission is prior to our commission, all of our maps were drawn behind closed doors by politicians and for politicians. Voters were not involved in that process. They were deliberately shut out and ignored. Now, with the commission, everything is happening in open meetings. Voters are encouraged to, like I said, participate in the entire process, start to finish, and we get to understand how and why the maps that we get are representing us.
Okay.
And so that's just, the process side of it. And then also, when you actually just analyze the maps themselves, Michigan has some of the most competitive congressional maps in the entire country. And in a similar way, our state legislature is far more competitive. And in the 2022 state legislature election, which was the first election we had under these new maps, the share of votes that each party got almost exactly lined up to the share of seats that each party got, which is about as fair and democratic as we can possibly make it.
Okay. That sounds good. So the 2022 ballot initiative, can you talk more about that one?
Yeah, so 2022, that initiative was a coalition, and it was called the Promote the Vote 2022 Coalition. Voters Not Politicians, our piece of that was, of course, mobilizing our volunteers. Many of the same volunteers who got signatures with us in 2018 came back again in 2022. We collected over 170,000 of the signatures to get it on the ballot. And then, of course, it passed pretty overwhelmingly across the board because really most folks do agree that elections should be modern, they should be accessible, and they should be secure. And that was all that this ballot initiative was about. So it added 9 days of in-person early voting where voters are showing up just like they would on election day, but on a weekend instead of on a Tuesday when everyone has to work. Okay. We made it part of the Constitution now that the winners of elections are decided purely based on the vote totals. There can't be any sort of, oh, well, court ordered this or we decided this. It's just what the ballots say. That's what's happening. It was made illegal to intimidate election workers. Oh my goodness, what else? We have some pretty strong voter ID laws in Michigan that also allow when voters are facing hardship or they do not have their ID to still prove their identity. Okay. And those were cemented into our Constitution. I'm struggling to remember even all of the different things that we did. Absentee ballots were made more accessible for folks, especially concerning postage because not everyone has stamp or stamped money. but they still have a right to vote, and they should have access to that right. So a bunch of different things that really just all went into making sure that every voter has not just the right to vote, but the opportunity and the access to vote.
Sure, sure. So earlier you said that you're the communications director, right? Did I hear right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So what are your responsibilities for the role?
So for me, Voters Not Politicians is a pretty small nonprofit, pretty scrappy kind of nonprofit. And that means that, I do all the things that fall into the realm of communications. Whether that is, talking to folks like this, that external sort of thing, talking to press, and doing reach out to press as well. But also, of course, the very real social media side of communications, because when we want to talk to the public, very often we got to go directly to the public. So looking at social media and also going to different events, whatever it takes to really reach out to the people and get in contact with them. It's sort of my job to help figure out how we do that and to make sure that folks know our mission and our work and that they're able to get involved.
Great. Would you say that your organization is a youthful organization, or is there a lot of different ages in your organization?
So it's interesting that you would start with youthful. That is not what I think most people would describe our organization as, because we are so very volunteer oriented. And it's really important to acknowledge that there is a privilege in being able to spend your time volunteering. A lot of young people, myself included, not just work full time, but might work multiple jobs.
Sure.
And having that little bit of extra time to say, I want to go out and get signatures, not always accessible, even if you believe in the cause. But we're really, honored and, I'm going to say privileged again, to have this really strong cohort of volunteers, many of whom are retired, retirees, who have sort of taken on a second or third act in life. Their next newer career is political activism.
Okay.
And, we have volunteers who basically have made it a full-time job post-retirement to stand up and take action for democracy. And, a lot of them will say they're not just doing it for themselves, they're doing it for future generations and to make sure that, future generations, younger folks, have a strong government and have policies that protect them and work for them.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to use your retirement.
Yeah, I am always so impressed. And I mean, our volunteers they're go-getters. They are out doing the thing. And I'm like, I just hope and pray that I have the energy that you all do by the time I make it to retirement, because they will go.
So are the social media channels and your other events, is that how you find these volunteers?
I think a lot of our volunteers are found somewhat through social media and a lot through relationship building.
Okay.
I think sometimes when we're part of this internet generation, we think that, those online relationships is how to get connected to people. But really it's, my most effective recruitment strategy has always been texting my friends and saying, hey, come meet me at this protest. We are going to go protest together. And then I have put a clipboard in their hands and said, okay, now go get signatures. So yes, we definitely reach new people, through social media, but a lot of it is just the on the ground work of reaching out to new people wherever you are, and making that in-person connection and then saying, hey, come with me to get signatures, come with me to sit at a table and talk to people, or just come with me to a meeting so you can learn a little bit more about this organization and what we do.
Sure.
That is how you make the real connection that gets people taking the action.
Sure. So what's the best place to get signatures? Is it go door to door, or go to big events, or stand in the middle of downtown? Or are all of them good in their own ways?
all of them are good in their own ways. You know, that's kind of one of the cool things about getting signatures as a form of activism. It does not look one way at all. Some folks get signatures and they do go door to door. One of our most successful volunteers in our last campaign by himself got over 3,000 signatures.
Wow.
And all he did was just go door to door almost every single day. Another technique, I really like doing big events like going to protests, because everyone is already like there and yelling and excited, and so it makes it a little less intimidating to just go to people and say like, hey, do you want to sign this? Money out of politics, sign this. Money out of politics, sign this. And people will do it, which is pretty cool. And it's another great way because there's so many people in one space that if you can get enough volunteers there and everyone's got their clipboards out, you can get a lot of signatures. You can also go to tables. You can do tables at events. But again, in-person relationships also really matter. So I've also taken this to my book club, for example, and I will say like, hey, before we get started, does anyone want to sign this? We definitely encourage, especially like, you know, we just had the holidays, and anytime you're with your family, absolutely, they're your family. You have to talk to them anyway. You might as well talk to them about getting money out of politics or ending gerrymandering. So getting signatures from, you know, people you know. I think I took one to a friend's Christmas party, or I took a couple of clipboards to a friend's Christmas party and got signatures there, and then also sent other people out with clipboards and said like, hey, you know what? Try your best as you go to see your family or whatever this weekend, and then get it back to me when you can. So there is no one way to collect signatures. Everyone does their own thing. Some people will organize at their churches. Some people will, you know, some people do, like through social media, they'll send out the word and they'll have just their one little sign and dash event. Like you go into a coffee shop, you sign real quick, and you go about your business. All sorts of ways.
Great, great. So in regards to taking money out of politics, what do you think is the ideal system for campaigns and finance? Because campaigns will always need money to run. So what do you think is the best way to arrange the state of affairs for that?
Yeah, so there's a whole big, I don't know if it's like a big wall of money in politics, and there's all these different policies that you can sort of use to tear it down piece by piece. So I'm going to start by talking about what we're doing here in Michigan right now, which is we are really tackling some of the biggest contributors to our state politics, right? As we know, all politics is local, and the more local that you get, the more these politics impact your day-to-day life. So we're looking at, you know, what's happening in Lansing right now. And some of the biggest contributors are state contractors. So like our regulated utility, we have a few utility monopolies, and they are huge donors to state politics. Politicians on both sides of the aisle will sort of be beholden to these utility monopolies. And it has very often, very clearly led to votes that didn't seem to reflect the will of the people, but more the will of these utility companies. These stakeholder or shareholder-owned utility companies, to be clear. And then in a similar way, we also have like healthcare companies, health insurance companies, which get billions of dollars in state contracts and are some of the biggest contributors to state politics. So United Healthcare and Blue Cross Blue Shield are some, like I said, multi-billion-dollar state contract holders who also give to politicians on both sides of the aisle. And it means that they get to be in the rooms when conversations and policy decisions are happening about healthcare and health insurance, insurance reforms, things like that. We actually just had in 2025 a great example because there was just recent news coverage about this in Bridge, Michigan, one of our local state papers. But in 2025, we had a big road funding deal that passed, and it had been talked about, and it was a whole big thing. It was one of the few pieces of legislation that really passed in this prior session because we had divided government. But shortly before that road funding deal, which is worth about $2 billion, hundreds of thousands of dollars flowed into both House Republicans and Senate Democrat campaign funds from road builders, from construction companies, folks who own and rent heavy equipment, and folks who do pavement and excavation. So the same people who are going to be benefiting from road funding deals and fixing roads were the people who spending a lot of money right before these important votes by politicians. So one of the things we're doing with Mop Up Michigan is banning these state contractors, any state contractor with big contracts over $250,000 annually, from contributing to state and local officials that are supposed to regulate them, or like the parties themselves. And the same way, the regulated utilities will no longer be able to donate to office holders or candidates even. So like the same candidates for office. And a lot of folks have said to us, it's like, well, that won't stop Citizens United, but what about the federal level? And I'm like, all right, we aren't going to what about this ourselves? It's not doing anything. We're going to take a hit at some of the biggest dollars, let that flow through our state and affect what is happening here in the state of Michigan.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So you're not being overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the problem. You're doing something about it. Like you said, taking a piece out of the wall.
Exactly. There's, like I said, money in politics is a big issue, and there's a lot of things that we would have to do to combat every piece of it. But we're not going to sit here and do nothing. We're gonna start taking swings at it. And
Great.
You know, one of the good things is we already know that this is a good policy and that it stands up to a lot of the, you know, everyone's always like, what about Citizens United? We know that this stands up for Citizens United because it's actually already the law in, I believe, 15 other states. So we're just adding Michigan to the list because it's good policy and it's better for voters.
Okay. So that's going to be done through ballot initiative because it would be hard to convince the government, the legislators who are benefiting from this to support it, right?
Yes. And in fact, we tried, in the last legislative session, we introduced these, same policies as legislation. We found a few, legislative champions. And then it went nowhere last session. And that was when we actually had a Democratic trifecta in Michigan's government. This session, we have split government. So we have Republican control over the House, Democratic control over the Senate and governor's office. And we had bipartisan sponsorship of this legislation. We had both Republican and Democratic sponsors, and it still did not move. Which shows that there are individual politicians who see that there's a problem here, and they're willing to, you know, stand up and say, hey, we shouldn't be beholden to these corporations. But overall, within the political establishment from both the right and the left, there was not the willingness to move. And that's why, you know, voters we're gonna do the hard work for these politicians. So they don't have to anymore. We'll take this one off their plate for them.
Oh, good. Yes, yeah, that sounds great. It sounds like it's a corrupt situation that you're doing a good thing of getting that done with. So yes. So Melinda, how can our audience support your organization and what it does?
Absolutely. So if folks are in the state of Michigan listening, obviously we want them to volunteer with us. I'm guessing that your audience, like 80-some% of Michigan voters, probably also believes in this money out of politics initiative and, you know, getting these big corporate contributors out of Lansing.
Sure.
And if so, they should go to vnp.vote/volunteer-circulate, and then they can sign up and they can start getting signatures, whether that's door to door at an event or just, you know, sitting at home, talk to your family and friends. And they can actually take action and help us get this on the ballot. And then of course, for everyone else outside of Michigan, we always are, of course we are a nonprofit. We do take donations. We live and breathe by them. And you can learn more about the work we do and donate at bmp.vote. And you can also follow us on social media because it always helps when we're able to spread the word and spread the message. You'd be surprised how often I talk to people about the work we do, and especially this Money Out of Politics campaign, and they're like, I haven't heard of that before. And I'm like, I promise I've been screaming it from the mountaintops. So if folks want to follow us at Voters Not Politicians on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, we are on Blue Sky at Not Politicians. We are on Substack, all of the things. And that's how they can learn more and keep up with the campaign and help us spread the word to everyone in the state.
All right, sounds great. So, Melinda, thank you for talking to us on the podcast today. We love what you're doing, and we trust you'll keep doing more of the same.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me on.
Take care and all the best.
Bye-bye.